common thing you usually hear when people discuss soaps, especially coming from people who haven't really watched soaps in like a good decade or two, or times where they would have watched it when they were younger, often say, I remember when soaps weren't as dramatic, you know. I remember when soaps used to be two people complaining about the price of bread. And it's been very prevalent as a lot of people still hold these views. But as of late, there have been two cancer storylines, both of which have followed similar trajectories, similar length, but the endings of the storylines were completely different. I'm talking about both Lola Pearce Brown's death in EastEnders and Juliet Nightingale's death in Hollyoaks. Both started around a similar time. Juliet's started around 6 months ago, and Lola's started around 7 months ago, so fairly similar in length. But there were very two key differences. Obviously, the Lola storyline, nobody really expected it to be as emotional as it was, and within like the last month, every single episode was miserable. But with the Juliet storyline, it was sad because you're gonna miss the character, but it wasn't really too sad along the way, or at least I wasn't nearly as invested as I were the Lola storyline. But then it kind of comes to how both characters died. Lola's exit has been praised tremendously because they took a more realistic approach for how she died. She didn't get the I love you, I miss you, and then she suddenly just like kicks the bucket. This was a very slow, like drawn out death. The last words Lola said was "love you" pops out of nowhere, and that was the last thing she said, and that was like 2 episodes before she actually died. She spent the whole time in bed, just like unable to do anything with just her family watching her.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Juliet got all of the bells and whistles. They were trying to make every moment her final moment and her best moment. All the family was around. And she also got a very sentimental scene with her like lover Perry, where she essentially went, "Listen, right, you've made my life, and it's been perfect." And then she like looks up, she sees the stars, and then Perry's just like, "Jules," and then like looks up and then sees that she's dead. Enter the crying, some like sentimental music as well. And it wrapped up in a very in a stereotypical Hollyoaks way, quite overdone, but also pretty. It's that soap drama versus the realistic version. And the stickler for me is I was sad all the way up until the end, except for the final episode, and even like since, I just haven't been able to cry for the Lola death. And that kind of proves to me when I did cry with the Juliet death. So that kind of points out to me that I prefer the soap way. I would rather it be like all dramatized and like everything's the most extreme, because that one actually made me cry, and that one like that death hurt. So Piggy, your thoughts?
You're going to get all the Hollyoaks fans mad. How dare you say it's a soap way of dying? My granny died like that when she was 85. All the Hollyoaks fans are going to be like that. But obviously I prefer them. Like it's weird because like 40 years ago is the 80s now, which is a sign that we're getting old. Even though I'm near my 20s, you're in your 20s. 40 years ago, I would say I loved the soap way because life was different in the 80s. Yes, a lot of pedophiles were doing programming, but we're not going to disclose that. But like soaps were different. Like they were much more grounded. They didn't have depth. It was just a surface level. That's it. Your character might get a few works in. Does that make sense? Like Dirty Den obviously got his works in.
There were definitely there were still the deaths, obviously, but
Yeah.
to just add to this by saying my experience of watching like the first year of EastEnders, it was a lot more wholesome and a lot less ambitious. It was very happy to just be two people chatting about, our son ran away, what are we gonna do? You know, it was fairly grounded in reality. Whereas now, it's a little bit more exotic.
Yeah. I might, if this video is going to be long, I will get into more detail later on. But I prefer the more realistic soaps now. Like, I understand if it pet peeves people, because people prefer the more like, I love you, Ma, I love you, Dad, I'm dying, I'm dead. People prefer that way. But I think, especially now, where basically soaps are dramas, they are basically, you could kind of, it's like the choose the yellow wire, green wire. You don't really know the difference. They're intertwined, basically, is what I'm saying. Just soaps are pre-watershed, dramas are post-watershed. Most of them are. I prefer the more realistic ways now. I prefer how they did Lola's death. Obviously, I didn't see the other characters' death, but I much prefer how they do realistic deaths. I don't like the whole you get to say your final goodbyes, because there will be people, great example, Ben Mitchell, who will miss their final moments with their loved ones. There will be people who just don't care and give up, to be brutal. And there'll be people like, I love you, and then there'll people be like, feck, I missed it. So yeah, my point is, I prefer the more realistic approach. But obviously soaps have grown from, yep, my son got kidnapped, stick the kettle on, let's have a chat about gays and AIDS. Where now soaps are like, yeah, so £5 for bread. Jesus Christ, the world's gone crazy. Do you see that there's a trans athlete in sports? And then every granddad on Twitter is like, what the fuck? How dare they? So yeah, just basically to say that. That's how I view it. Things are definitely more realistic and like there's more depth. Basically what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Sorry for the long-winded.
I do somewhat agree. But I also, it is funny to me that I'm firmly on the side of, I like all of the drama. I like how characters are able to get those like incredible deaths, because like I said, it's hard, or like you said rather, it's so hard. You never get those moments. You never know when your last moment's going to be the final goodbye. So in soaps, like let's say one of my favorite deaths, or two of my favorite deaths in soap. One example you'll know, the other you won't. First is Jack and Vera's death in Coronation Street. I've talked about them before on the channel before, but they are your like grandparents essentially. They are like really wholesome. Like they never really say like, oh, I love you, but you know that they wouldn't want to be here with anybody else. Like they built their life together. They may like fall out sometimes, but they still love each other. They just like to row. That's just a part of the fun. And in both of their deaths, the other because basically Vera died first, and obviously like Jack was there in the flesh. But when Jack died, he like he like envisioned in his final moments like a final like meeting with Vera where they shared a kiss, they had a small little dance, and then then you just see him like dead in the chair, and it's a really. And then,
No, you haven't left me, you haven't. Oh. You could have left me.
And then you have Pat's death, where she got to say goodbye. She got to say like bye to Ricky. She got to say all the things she'd always wanted to say to Janine, and you know how, you know, as much as they never really saw eye to eye, they like, Pat still loved her like she was her own, you know, like it was still that big wholesome moment. Even David Wicks like trying to get there in time but a bit too late, because that's kind of how David Wicks always was with Pat. And those deaths hurt me the most. Like, those deaths are the hardest to have, but I suppose I also haven't necessarily been through, like, let's say a long drawn out like long standing illness death. So I'm sure if one character just suddenly dies of a heart attack, I'll be like, oh, fuck. You know.
Ah, well, there we go. Bring in the new characters. Let's get the ball moving. Introducing George Knight's next kid. So what, Johnny's there? Fuck him.
It's just an interesting talking point, because I do agree with what you said before as well, is that sometimes soaps now and soaps like when they're initially absurdly popular have obviously changed dramatically. Like that you can compare the two, but like they don't come across in the same way. Like obviously 1985 EastEnders was a lot more earnest. It was a new, like, you know, Coronation Street had been on the air for at least like over 25 years at that point, but still this was a new fresh soap, and they have to start their route somewhere. They had to establish all these characters and all these families at once. And it's just, I don't know. I guess it's more an interesting discussion point of, are soaps too dramatic these days, or are they just about right? Are they actually worth, like, I feel like it would be an interesting thing to find some episodes of like classic EastEnders, let's say, because you've never really watched much classic EastEnders, have you?
Probably some clips.
Yeah,
probably one. I probably watched the debut episode, like the very first episode. Have I watched any other? I might have watched a Christmas special.
Yeah, probably.
I definitely remember watching Bradley's death.
Yeah, but
like,
even in comparison, like, let's say like even 2007, 2008, in comparison to 1985 or something, it would be interesting to see how you like take to the like different style. But it also reminds me, this is a slight tangent, but it's also kind of my point where obviously the favorite part of soap is obviously the time you started watching, like properly, you know, the time you properly got into it. And for most people, it's at very different times. Like, let's say it's 2000s and it's Coronation Street. People watch the Richard Hillman, like, serial killer storyline. You know, that's an iconic moment in a lot of people's childhoods. It was big and it was huge. It was amazing. Or even in EastEnders, what people aren't even many, like, have there actually been decent serial killers in EastEnders? But, you know, you remember the moments. People remember the time Phil set the Vic on fire. People remember Bradley falling off the roof. You know.
We remember Ian Beale's classic quote, "I've got nothing left, Phil. I've got nothing left." People remember Tiffany's death. Obviously, Tiffany and Grant. You know, people remember the time Ronnie finally knew that Danielle was her kid, but she got run over and killed on the spot. These moments are a big deal, and these you forgot one. All right. You forgot one. Who can forget Ben Mitchell's two classic ones? The one where he's in court and he goes, "Phil!" and Phil goes, "Ben! Phil! Ben!" And the other one with a wrench where he goes, "You need slapping down." Two iconic quotes. Two iconic ones, yeah. So that kind of comes into why a lot of people will say soaps is better when I was interested. Just like, I don't even know any of the characters anymore. Because watching it further on, you don't have that sense of familiarity. You watch it in 2003, and when you watch it in 2023,
you go, fuck. Well, I know Phil, and I know Kat, and I know Alfie, but who the fuck are the rest of these guys?
And Sharon. They would know Sharon. And probably Martin. But they would probably be like, is that Martin Fowler?
Fuck it, Martin's changed.
Did he have a sex change? What the fuck? What happened to him?
So that kind of, like I said, it's everybody has nostalgia for a certain period. Maybe it's like your like favorite time period of growing up. Like I'm nostalgic for the like mid to late like 2000 to like 2010s, you know. Like I love the period where everybody had flip phones and social media wasn't entirely widespread and everybody had fucking ridiculous haircuts and wore stupidly loose clothing, you know. That like mid 2005 to 2010 period. Like that's nostalgic for me. I love that shit. It's incredible because at that point my brain was in like that was my like innocence. That was when I didn't really, I couldn't really think for myself, you know, like that's the time period that feels home to me.
Yeah.
And you know, I love to watch soaps in that time period because it's fucking great fun. Because, you know, whatever hang-ups you have now, it's not really reflected back then.
But you know what's weird? And people will go, no, it's totally different. You're comparing it to wrestling. But it's so weird because the 80s and 90s, for soaps at least, feel near enough the exact same. But when you look at soaps from like the 2000s to the 2010s to the 2020s, it feels like three different eras. Like the 2000s had flip phones, it had, you know, wacky hair. Yeah. They experimented more. I do believe soaps experimented in the 2000s because
just the popularity kind of staggered, you know.
Yeah, and then they were like, "We're bringing back Dirty Jet." Oh no, get rid of them. Yeah, and basically soaps from like 2000 to 2010, like it's a completely different era. Like when you're watching it, and then soaps from like 2010 just were the drizzling shits. Like there would be people who'd be like, I loved it. Glad you can be in the trenches. I've not been in the trenches with you because that is just full of shit in them trenches. I think you look at the 2020s and it's like we're in a renaissance era. We're in a new era of soaps.
Yeah, I'd say we're definitely heading towards it. I don't think we're there yet. There was a lot of catch up after the pandemic and whatnot, so we're definitely heading towards a new golden age in soaps.
Can I just say, and I'm not saying thank you China for the coronavirus, but like the coronavirus really helped. I know people will be like, the coronavirus is fake. Donald Trump made it up in a basement. I don't care what your political stance is on the coronavirus. Just admit it's real. That's all I care about. I don't care if you believe in masks or not.
Carry on.
But yeah. Anyways, before we delve into that bucket, I feel like COVID helped like reinvent everything. You know what I mean? Because you're all just stuck at home. You have nothing to do but wank off again, like, and throw a ball with your kid. But it's social distancing, of course. But you had nothing to do. And I feel like that's when all the writers just meant, I've got an idea, lads.
Yeah, and
are you
definitely
ready?
The time that most shows had to be able to, well, obviously all the soaps had to pause. So, you know, you can't keep filming. People get sick. That'll be a fucking crisis. So obviously gave the writers time to pause and like ways to actually start thinking about it. And it gave the shows a reason to like try develop new technology, different ways of filming stuff. Like when EastEnders came back, they were talking about, oh, we made some like great things, you know, that like people would be kissing through plastic and, you know, it'd be like well shot and it wouldn't look any different rather. It'll always be a weird time, like just like the year after or so, for however long they kind of kept up with the protocols. But like it'll be really interesting to study if you're like a TV show historian, you know, like what was the culture like at that point.
It's
But it, yeah, like you said, it gave them the time to pause, and it gave them like, oh, maybe this storyline shit, and it also gave them like, okay, we're coming back. EastEnders was back in October, I believe. It was October 2020. They'd stopped from about April all the way to October. They came back with Chantel's death and like kicked off the whole Grey like killer storyline. And it was huge and it was amazing. But then it also just kind of fizzled out. And that's what, to be fair, it also did a lot of damage to soaps because in Coronation Street at the time, they were doing this coercive control case where Jeff and Yasmin, Jeff just slowly took away all of Yasmin's responsibility and just tore her down and made her really vulnerable. And she like snapped and like stabbed him. And then because they had to slow down the amount of episodes they put out a week, mate, it felt like it was going on for years. Like, oh, Jesus Christ. It was 3 episodes a week and it's like, fuck, lads, can we just speed it up? Nothing's happening anymore.
I do agree that like the coronavirus, or however you want to word it, did slow down soaps, but it did make soaps realise, right, we're failing here, lads. This is a sinking ship. We need new ideas. And then someone's like, can we rise 30 Den back from the... Shut up. And then they were like, any other days, give Mick Carter a good story. Shut up. And then it's like, any more? Yeah. Bring in Reese. You've got it. Bring him in. And then Reese came in with a torch and saved the show. But yeah. The coronavirus, like the COVID, because people probably get fed up with me saying the coronavirus, like an Irishman lad. But COVID really did... Like it's gonna be like, you know, like in 20 years time, like when we're in our 40s, and then people born in the 2020s have to do fucking history books, like history books. It's gonna be so weird, like how they're like, so EastEnders in 2020 was going so bad, and then a fucking flu came along and killed it, but then it came back with a murderer, and then this happened, and also someone stormed the Capitol. Wait, what? Ignore that. Anyways, so this happened. Just moving that on. And then they're like, we brought new writers, new ideas, and then our writer's strike happened in America, I think. I don't know if it's worldwide.
Yeah, well, I suppose fundamentally, if there's anything to take away from this video, is there is a place for both overly dramatic and actually realistic stuff in soap. It's honestly, it just depends on what you're interested in. I personally absolutely adore the like overly dramatic shit, unless it's Mick Carter's exit and that felt too contrived for me. But you know, fundamentally, I absolutely adore the over dramatized. People get their final like say, they get the final words. Usually it's not as concrete, because my view of soaps is it's like real life, but you cut out all the boring shit in the middle. And everybody's absolutely wild. And that's the bit I love, because it's like vicariously, you know these people. You know what they've been through. That's why you're invested in the characters. But there is also the place to, you know, take it more realistic. Actually make waves in like soap history, you know, actually be praised for doing something genuinely heartbreaking and actually affecting a whole lot of people. So Peggy, in closing, are soaps too damn dramatic these days?
Yes and no. It just depends how you like your apples. That basically is it. Like, if you want a realistic soap, then this is the time to get into it. But if you want a very grounded, like, my child has robbed an apple from you, Stacey. No, you fucking robbed the apple, you slag. And then you're like, no, you're a slag. Then go back to like the 80s, 90s and early 2000s. But soaps will forever change. It's a revolving door. Nothing stays the same. You cannot have the same show for 50, 60 years, because there'll come a point where you're like, so Phil, what did Phil do again? He robbed a bank, then he robbed a bank, then he robbed a bank, then he did some sex work, then he robbed a bank. And you're like, okay, then what else did he do? Oh, he just went to Rome and stole a fault. Oh, so he did a Fast and Furious. Yeah, and then his best friend died, and that happened, and then he became a doctor. And like, oh yeah, you've started the tangent here. Like, yeah, but then he also became an astronaut. Yeah, see, this is where it doesn't work. That's why subs need to change. Because they'll just become unrealistic and end up like Fast and Furious, where they just become shit. And basically you have one guy being like, come on, do it for Paul Walker. What would Paul want? And you're like, Paul's been dead for 10 years, mate. Get the fuck over it.
So yeah, ultimately it's your choice. Whether you like it to be a little bit wild, or you like it to be a little bit more reserved. Soaps are pretty accommodating and they'll always be there for you. But what do you think? Are soaps too dramatic? Do you prefer it when, it was just two people arguing about the price of bread? I sure don't. But some people do. And tell us what you think in the comments below. I have been Ash from Watching Walford, and I've been joined by Piggy.
I am a sad cake now because I'm probably going to get chewed out off camera for mentioning the Capitol being stormed. But subscribe, hopefully follow us on Twitch, Instagram, Twitter at Watching Walford, because no one took it. I wish someone took our name because that would be funny. But yeah, join us. Don't join us because that's Cultaholics thing. Subscribe.